gonna go out on a limb here and say that there's quite a bit wrong with Grace. This is 2018's The Darkest Minds. Spoiler alert, while I might be giving you my opinion on the film, that's no substitute for watching it yourself. Links to the film are in the description. Grace falls to the floor, and students and staff come over to check on her. It turns out that she died right there on the spot. Ruby explains that by the end of the school year, half of her class was dead. It turns out that it's a highly contagious disease, and many children across the country have died. Bizarre behavior begins to happen all over, as well as things start to move on their own, and suspicious teens seem to pop up on security cameras. The president addresses the reporters, and it turns out that his own son is a survivor of the disease. He's undergoing treatment, and things look good for him. Meanwhile, Ruby and her parents celebrate her birthday with a little gift exchange in her room. Ruby talks about how she'll be when she's 16, and the thought of her not making it that long is enough to make her mother start to cry. I couldn't imagine that. Some weird disease pops up and kids just start dropping like flies. I'd be worried about it too. Sure enough, Ruby gets some sort of pulse and feeling when she goes to check on her parents that night, and by the next morning, her mother's forgotten all about her. Well, damn. At least her mom won't have to worry about losing her anymore. She already has, and she doesn't even remember it. Ruby's mother takes her to the garage where she locks her out for a moment, and Ruby can't stand the fact that her home is no longer her home. Soon, men in yellow biosuits show up and take her away. They take her to one of the camps the government set up for the children that survived the disease's initial effect. It turns out that these children have special powers now, and some of them can be rather malevolent. After witnessing a teen make a soldier kill herself with his mind, Ruby's taken back to a doctor who conducts her initial screening. He explains that she's not sick anymore, but she's not allowed to go home until they can figure out what makes her different. He explains that each of the children are given a color that represents their power. I beg to differ, that's as terrible as it can get. It turns out that she's the same kind of weirdo as the teen that just killed a soldier outside. That's not so terrible. The doctor grabs a needle to finish the job, but Ruby gets scared when she sees him coming. She tries to run away, but when he grabs her, she manipulates his mind into making him believe that she's one of the good colors. She's then released with the super safe kids, and she realizes that she's the only one of her color that made it past the screening process. So she learned to suppress her powers for 6 years. One day, Ruby was being harassed by one of the captains, but it turns out that they're performing a frequency test that day to determine if they're really in the correct groups. The test seems to knock her out. But when she comes to, she's handcuffed to a bed in a cage. Dr. Kate is by her side, and she promises that she's going to help her as best as she can. When the doctor's taken out, Ruby looks through the clipboard that was left on her bed, and she finds a note with a key that says they know that she's orange. Sure enough, Dr. Kate meets her in the boiling room, where she gives her a change of clothes and hides her in the car. The captain almost catches them, but Ruby manipulates his mind. Could you imagine the amount of trouble someone could get into if they had that power? Just walk around and tell people whatever you please. I already paid for that. This is my house, not yours. That's my wife. Someone in the orange level could literally take over the world for their own. That's a bit concerning. As they continue driving, Ruby finds out that a lot of local towns ended up losing all of their residents since there were no children around. Economies failed and the population moved. Eventually, they run into Rob, who gives Ruby a bag with a change of clothes. Ruby happens to trip, and she grabs a hold of Rob's arm to catch herself. When she does this, she catches a glimpse of Rob's past, and she sees that he caught kids just like her. She brushes it off for the time being, but when she goes inside to change, she ends up meeting Zoo, who can manipulate electricity. After she gets in a van with her, 2 other teens show up, and they take off with Ruby in the back. Well, they're in for a huge surprise when they find an orange teen in the back of their van. Called it. They decide to not let her leave the van now, but soon a woman named Lady Jane shows up and starts shooting at the van. Then, Rob and Kate show up behind her and try to run her off the road. The kids have Ruby take control of the wheel, and the one boy hangs out the back of the van and starts to manipulate the trees and the road itself to try and get their pursuers to leave them alone. His plan ends up working, and they get away for the time being. We find out the other 2 kids are actually Liam and Chubbs. Chubbs is a green, which means he's super smart, and Liam's blue, so he's telekinetic. It turns out that they're trying to reach others that are led by an orange level guy. Ruby's hesitant at first, but she joins them on their journey. Back at the compound, the captain has put a bounty on Ruby's head. Back in the teenage palace that is some hotel room, Liam makes some smooth moves when he offers Ruby socks. Yeah, it's literally one of the most painful teen romance interactions, and it's all because of socks. Anyways, right after that, they all sleep, and Ruby happens to touch Zoo's arm, which gives her a look at her memories. Talk about invasion of privacy. It turns out that Liam actually helped Zoo escape the camp that they were kept at, and he's still looking after her now. The next morning, Ruby's parents happen to come out of the next room, but they simply get in their car and leave the kids alone. Later, the kids head to a mall to get supplies for the rest of their trip. Yeah, it's time to go. Pack up and teleport your butt back to the van. Obviously, it's too late though. Whoever's in there with them starts moving them with their mind. After Zoo makes the power surge, the new kids step down and reveal themselves. They agree to let them stay there for one night, but that's it. That night, Ruby lies in a tent and reads a story to Zoo. Watership Down. Keep in mind, Zoo looks like she isn't even 10 yet. Watership Down may look like a cute little bunny story, but I promise you that it's not a children's book or movie. If you're trying to give that kid nightmares, that's a guaranteed way to do it. After telling Zoo to sleep peacefully somehow, Ruby holds back from touching Liam to get a glimpse of his mind. And she heads out to see if Chubbs has figured out the location of the Orange Leader. After they talk about their families, a clue points him to the answer to the riddle, and he finds out the location that they need to get to. The next morning, they all get in the van and head for Lake Prince, which is where Ruby's from. Once they make it to Lake Prince, they all say their goodbyes to Ruby since they think she might be able to convince her parents that she belongs there. When she gets to the house, she looks inside to realize that she can never really go back to her parents. After she runs to a nearby field, Liam ends up showing up, and he assures her that she'll always have a place with them. After all, they have to stick together. Hey there to you too! I wasn't expecting a surprise like that in this kind of movie. I was even wondering when the hell something would go wrong. It had been too quiet for too long and nothing bad has really happened since she left the camp. We see that Lady Jane has the other two already detained by the van, and she actually has a personal history with catching Liam already. When she comes to Ruby, Ruby grabs her arm and manipulates her to let them go and walk forever in the direction of the forest. As Lady Jane walks off, Ruby passes out in the road. When she comes to, she can hear her companions, and she sees that the van is parked in the middle of the woods. After all of the awkwardness of everyone knowing that she's an orange level, they decide that it's time to leave the van and continue on foot. Not too much longer, they finally make it to the camp where all the other kids are living safely. They go to meet the leader, and they find out that it's a boy named Clancy Gray, the president's son. He welcomes them all to the community. And that night, Liam and Ruby grow even closer to each other. The next morning, Ruby goes to see Clancy, and she finds out that Clancy has decided that she'll be working with him. These two just seem to have a connection since they're both orange level, and I think it would be so cool to have a whole community of orange people. None of them would talk with their mouths again, just little telepathic sticky notes being sent back and forth. Ruby asks Clancy to teach her how to control her powers, and he hopes that once she learns how, she'll use it for the cause. As her powers grow, and she proves that she can manipulate people from a distance, Chubb starts to be more suspicious of this community. Later, Liam heads to Clancy's hut just in time to catch him holding Ruby's hands to go in her mind. And he finds out that Ruby actually erased herself with her parents. Clancy, on the other hand, is simply excited to find someone that has powers even further beyond his own. He assures her that they'll find a way to reverse it together, and Liam isn't too happy to hear how close they're getting. Imagine finding out the one girl you've run into after all this time is deciding to go with the president's son simply because they're the same. That seems a little messed up. He sacrificed his life for you and expressed how he's willing to be patient with your powers, but this dude pops up and just has the same category. That's all it takes apparently. Ruby goes to talk to Chubbs, and Chubbs expresses that something's wrong with the facility. Ruby decides to go to Clancy and ask if Chubbs can use his computer to contact his parents, but Clancy's messaging someone about turning in his crop of mutant children. He makes the deal, but he makes them promise that Ruby stays with him. Once Ruby comes in, Clancy decides that it isn't a good idea for Chubbs to go on his computer, but he has a change of heart as he tells her to teach him how to erase himself from someone's memory. They delve into her memory of the night she erased her parents' memory, and when they come back, Clancy's on top of her. Now that he's learned how she did it, she sees him for the monster he really is. She runs out into the woods, and Liam spots her leaving. After he gets a glimpse of what just happened, Ruby talks him into leaving the camp with her. Chubbs has been waiting to hear that ever since they first arrived. Why wouldn't they have listened to a green category guy from the start? They're the smartest. As they head to the garage to get a vehicle, They run into all of the soldiers and captain that have come to gather the kids. It's here that Clancy reveals what side he's working on, and he reveals his plan to gather the children to create an army of super children. Suddenly, Ruby makes the captain shoot himself. And after Zoo creates a distraction, the 4 kids make their way outside in time to see helicopters of soldiers show up to round up the kids. They even have superpowered soldiers. For those of you that wanted to know what the red level kids did, here you go. They blow fire. They're frickin' dragons, essentially. Liam actually manages to put quite a few red levels down, but they're no match for Liam. Ruby stands to face him, and she even tries to use his own soldiers against him. It turns out that Liam's actually more in control of his own powers than she is, and he almost ends up erasing her memory. In the last second, Ruby brings down a helicopter and makes it out with Chubbs, who gets badly burned from the crash. They make it to the river where Ruby activates a tracker that alerts Kate to their position so they can help. As they wait, Liam shows up in the morning, and she tells him who she called to help them. When Kate shows up, they take the 3 of them to her house where they rest. Later, Ruby tries to explain that they won't be used as weapons, but she ultimately agrees if they let her tell Liam that he needs to leave. Enough with the sacrificial plays already! Stop telling loved ones to leave so they won't get hurt. You're both epic forces of nature that have already saved enough people. Team up! One of you can manipulate your way into the enemy's mind and change them, while the other one can toss anyone else that's out of reach. Take it all over. After a heartfelt talk, Ruby does the one thing that she thinks she has to do. Is anyone getting Avengers vibes from all this? All I saw was Peter saying he didn't want to go. Sorry to bring that up again. When he opens his eyes, Ruby is a complete stranger to him, and she sends him on his way. As Liam leaves the facility to finish his own story, Ruby takes this chance to continue her story. She heads to a stadium that's full of people ready to help take back their world. And we see that Clancy survived the crash and has his own army ready to attack. As Ruby takes the stage in front of the pack and shows her true color, the others in the stadium do the same, and we see that people from each category are there to join her. Then, the credits roll. This was a surprisingly good one considering how cliché a lot of it was. It didn't really bring anything new to the table, but none of the good coming-of-age ones really do. You always want to see how the story ends though. Now, I'm assuming that this is another one that went to production graveyard, because I haven't heard anything about a sequel. If you want to see some more superpower recaps though, check out this link next. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more like this one. Comment what you think I should watch next, and I'll see you in the next video.